Company of Makers. Podcast talks, workshops.
This series is dedicated to those who served in Telic and their families, marking the 20th anniversary of the commencement of operations. Each episode, we'll talk to members of the armed forces community who served in Telic, or whose lives have been directly impacted. These are true life accounts, and these personal stories may be emotionally challenging to hear. If you feel you may be sensitive to this, you may prefer not to listen.
Welcome to Land, Sea and Air. My name's Steve Pomford and I'm co-founder of Company of Makers.
And my name's Tip Cullen. I'm an actor and former Royal Marines Commando.
And today we're going to be listening to Sarah Davis, who was in the Army Air Corps during Telic.
Yeah, Sarah, another chum of mine from our acting days as well. I've worked with her in the Soldiers Arts Academy. She's an incredible lass.
She is indeed. Let's give it a listen. Sarah, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast, or SJ, Sarah Jane, as we've just been talking about before I hit the record button. But thank you for coming on the podcast and taking the time. And good luck with your interview that you got after this. Thanks for squeezing it in as well. So let's make sure we're on time here. Anyway, this is all about you and your experiences in the Iraq War. But I'd just like you to start off with, why did you join the Army? What was your role?
Hi, Steve. No, thanks for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. I was very much a tomboy growing up, and I found the Infantry Army Cadets, literally a kids club, which is still around today. It teaches self-reliance and individuality. They're really good with the Prince's Trust, the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. They're a fantastic organisation. And I just thought, this is a bit of me. I don't want to be doing the same office job till I retire. Arguably, that's what we crave now we're getting older. And I hate bullies. And it's funny, I was actually a member of Greenpeace being a child, a bit of a tree hugger. But I soon got wind of the fact, well, there's no planet to save if we're all at war and you can't protect your loved ones. So actually, I just knew from the age of 14 that that's what I wanted to do. Absolutely.
That's a very mature approach, dare I say, for a 14-year-old? Or maybe I'm just judging myself there.
I tell you what, you can't not prejudge the teenagers these days. I think I've got a 14-year-old daughter now that knows more than I do. So,
So that led you to joining up. What regiment were you in?
So I joined the Army Air Corps, and funnily enough, so I was badged the old Royal Berkshire, Gloucester's, Wiltshire, in fact, scrap that, RGW, Royal Gloucestershire, Berkshire and Wiltshire Regiment. Tongue twister. But no, there was a lot of, I remember there was a lot of Army redundancies. So we got a lot of fully trained soldiers that wanted to give their time. So we were like mini commandos. And I'll be honest, with my intake in cadets, I went to loads of basic trainings. We were the 20% statistic that ended up joining the regular military. So, I was going to be Royal Military Police, or I wanted to be Royal Engineers because my grandfather was a Royal Engineer, but they weren't allowed to let women in at that particular point in time. So when they said about Army helicopters, and for some reason I managed to pass highly enough to get that, I thought, oh, that sounds like fun. Why not? But they did sell me on being a pilot within 3 years, which if you have that with any person that joins the Army Air Corps, would laugh and say, yeah, that was how they got me in as well. It's not that easy.
So, but you did join the Army Air Corps. What was your role then? I'm assuming you didn't become a pilot from what you've just said.
No, so I was Army Air Corps ground crewman. And actually, I was a guinea pig for gender-free testing. They'd not long actually let women into that kind of role. And it was actually classed a teeth role, teeth arm. I know it's been service support and now it's gone back to combat. So obviously I had to pass the recruitment tests the same as the guys did. And we were in a mixed platoon at Sir John Moore Barracks in Winchester. And I was the only female as Army Air Corps in my section. So yeah, that was a bit nails. But I did it. And actually, although it was to my detriment when I got to unit, I believe I was the first female to get best shot and best recruit in basic training. So, they didn't like me very much by the time I got to phase 2, because I think my reputation had preceded me, which was a whole new set of issues, because I'm thankful now the British Army are a lot more inclusive of females in the military, put it that way.
But, I guess it wasn't ideal, some of the circumstances you found yourself in, but progress has been made, hasn't it? I think that's what you're saying there.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, some people have called us pioneers. I mean, I'm so respectful of women our age plus that have stayed or have some sort of career, because I just think, wow, I know some of the trials and tribulations I faced, but ultimately it just took time. My cohorts and my colleagues were so great, and I'd never change it for the world. I've had some of the best and worst times of my life, and it was a massive learning curve.
So what was your actual role as crew, ground crew?
Refueling and rearming attack helicopters. And before the streamlining of the Apache, it used to be one of the most multi-traded roles in the British Army. So we had to do the fuel course, we had to do the rigger marshaller's course, underslung loads. We did signals, telecommunications, all the driving roles. And now it's streamlined. You're either ground crew or your telecommunications. And in fact, to actually get your class 1, to get your promotion, you had to get all of that under your belt to class 1 before you could do your junior NCO's CADA. So it was actually, like you say, a lot longer than the 3 years to get pilot, because you had to have done your class 1s, be promoted to lance corporal, and then be eligible for full corporal before you could apply. But of course, once you're in one job role, that means you're taken out of it to be put forward for the pilot role in the Air Corps. So actually, it was easier to transfer from another unit in.
Right, okay.
Not that any of us knew that at the time.
I was going to say that wasn't in the advertising brochure, was it?
It definitely wasn't, Steve.
So were you still aspiring to be a pilot?
I was. I'd actually passed the pilot medical, and actually second time. So I got back in doing MPGS after I started a family. Long story, but I got Watersham again, and it came up. But because of my domestic situation at the time and my babies being very young, it was a family decision then to not go for it. So kind of gutted at that. But I've had an opportunity, and we have been flying occasionally. They do let air troopers and lance corporals loose occasionally, but that was on the old Gazelle in Canada in 2000. That was amazing, chasing coyotes across the prairie. Obviously done very safely, with a proper helicopter instructor and all the rest of it. But they were very good in that aspect. They were very good at looking at what options if you wanted to explore them.
So what year did you join up?
1999, Steve. I wanted to join earlier than that, but I had to wait for getting over the 18 barrier and made to do A-levels. My parents were not keen on me joining as a soldier. Actually, they wanted me to join as an officer like my grandfather. But I was determined to work hard for a living and get the notoriety, especially as a female joining up. Arguably, would it have been easier if I'd have joined as an officer? Potentially. But would I have got the same experience, notoriety and comradeship I had with my peers? Probably not. So, you can never say never, but I don't definitely regret my choices at the time.
Well, that's good to hear, isn't it? So it was only 3 years later that the Iraq War was upon you, wasn't it? What was the lead up to that like? Were you kind of aware of what was happening, that you'd be involved?
Yeah, so it was really interesting times, actually. And I remember 1999 being, you could still have a dishonourable discharge if you were homosexual. And it was going through a transition in its own right. And I remember one of my very good friends, I've had, a couple of people that had come out, and arguably we knew, but I know around about 98, 99, the Army were making that shift and making more inclusion, which was a massive plus. But yeah, you're right. So when it came to 2003, I mean, obviously prior to that, we knew it was coming up with the weapons inspectors and whatnot, and having to do a review on Iraq as a whole. But you could actually have a career in the Army and not see a war zone. I mean, if you think, the last major conflict okay, bar the odd little skirmish here and there, you've got Bosnia and Kosovo and all of that malarkey, but you had, literally the Falklands. So there was a lot of people, and I'll never forget the time we were in the amphitheatre on camp and we actually got told, we are deploying, this is happening. And there were a couple of really upset people that kind of said, hang on a minute, I joined to have a career, not to go to war. And the rest of us were kind of bewildered, thinking, but you're in the army. This is what we do. So I thought, wow, this is exciting. This is what we joined up for. And it was, there was the apprehension, but then there was a lot of excitement. And I did remember after that, the next level of clientele and recruits that were coming in actually were very different to the rest of us, because they knew that Afghanistan and whatnot were kicking off afterwards in quick succession. And actually they were looking for a fight. And it's just a bit bizarre when you look at the people at the time when I joined and then the people afterwards. Yeah, it's very distinct. I do remember it very well.
It was a very intensive period of operations, wasn't it? As you've said, with Iraq and Afghanistan, and lots of other things probably going on as well. That it was a time that changed the armed forces, I think, didn't it?
Well, it changed everything, Steve, and something that was quite a bit of a scandal at the time, which I not long ago just remembered. And everyone will agree with me. As soon as you pass basic training and you go to phase 2, and in fact, no, tell a lie, it was even in basic training, we got taken into a theatre and we were sat down and taught about kit insurance and life insurance with Abacus. And it was one of those mandatory things, if something happened and blah, 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 this is your safety net, this is your insurance, and this is what the military guides you to have. And then what happened was, as soon as we were due to deploy and war was declared, Abacus suddenly made all our life insurance and kit insurance void. Oh. And there was a massive hoo-ha because we've been paying years into this scheme, and then suddenly it didn't suit them because they were worried because a war had suddenly kicked off, which really tells you how much they thought that they were in an okay plus in terms of getting all their insurance paid for by every military personnel.
Mm. You just don't think about these. Well, obviously I wasn't there, and you just don't think about things like this at all.
No, and then there's making a will, and I'm barely 20, and I'm like, wow. This is crazy. Who's your next of kin? Who's your subsidiary next of kin? Who else do you want to be informed if the worst happened? And ultimately, yes, you join the army, but when it actually is there and it hits you in the face, you're like, ooh. And you obviously don't appreciate how much it affects your family and friends when you're doing that.
Yeah.
Initially, you're sold on the career, and secretly, I was kind of craving my own, doing my bit for Queen and Country, I suppose. But at the same breath, you then had a real sharp shock on how that affected everyone around you.
How did that affect everyone around you?
It was horrible. I mean, I remember we had sat phones. I think it was after the first 24 or 48 hours, we actually went over the border, and the whole battle group were given literally 10 minutes each just to tell loved ones that we were okay. And my grandfather was still alive back then, and he just couldn't believe it because he just thought, we never had this much coverage of World War II. It would have been completely unheard of. But I'll never forget the phone conversation. I rang my mum, and when you ring a family member and it's late and they kind of answer the phone a little bit like, hello,
yeah.
Who's this? Why are you ringing me this late at night? And I just remember pausing her, Mum, it's Sarah, it's me. And the change in her voice, she was wibbly, she was upset. Now, my mum was very stiff upper lip. So for me to gauge her being that upset, and she was telling me, oh my God, it's so good to hear you. They've got the first body bags being shown on the news. And obviously we had no clue this was happening. And so, I mean, I must admit, I had to have a hug off a hairy-assed artillery guy because I was just in a little bit of bits myself. I was completely taken aback by the reaction because my mum was my rock. And I think I actually promised her on that call, Mum, I promise I'm never going to do this to you again. Promise you. And she knew how much I loved the army. So that was a lot for me to say. And I did keep that promise to my mum.
Oh, well done you. So 48 hours. You've just said that you were able to do that. What's the story of your time in Iraq?
So, I mean, now I've been on a few film sets, which we'll cover later, Steve. It kind of reminded me about being on a film set. It was so surreal. I mean, obviously, when you go on holiday, you get off the plane and the heat hits you. But oh my God, did it hit you? We were held by this no-fly zone all of a sudden by the French and God knows what, if you remember in the news at the time. So actually, my partner at the time flew out nearly 2 weeks before us. And I remember even getting back, we're doing what we call the NCCP, where you have to go and make sure your kit's up to date, your paperwork's up to date. It was all these pre-deployment checks. We'd had war cop months before. So we were all getting ready for this war deployment. And I still remember one of our young guys, he looked like a frightened rabbit in headlights. He was literally with us a week before we deployed. He was the youngest guy ever to go into a war zone. Still friends with the majority of them on Facebook now, and they're what I would consider my boys, because I was a Lance Corporal at the time. And I don't think it's common knowledge now. You know, we raped the Corps to be able to do that war zone. Even to the point where I still had to take certain amounts of green kit out with me because we weren't all getting issued desert combats. And in fact, I had a funny story with my fella because they were attached to the Raw Logistics Corps. And they used to, please forgive me, the RAF, but they used to go underneath in the tents of the RAF stores and I won't say nick, acquisition relocation to where it needed. And then when they used to come out and volunteer and do a post run and God knows what, they literally throw a load of desert kit at us because we needed it. And when you're dealing with radio batteries and stuff, anyone that knows, the old desert kit were like pajamas, and they'd be threadbare in a matter of weeks. So it was well needed. But it's good British Army and military improvise, adapt and overcome. And, we did that out there. I know we did some good. There's quite a few stories we could pick up on that. But I know we did a good job. I mean, part of me is quite surprised we all survived and came back from Telic one, I have to admit. I think one of my highlights, though, on a funny, was, I believe it was Paddy's Day, and we were I think we had a nickname calling it Camp Underpants, Camp Eagle on the Kuwaiti border, and literally you're washing in like plastic sinks that are makeshift as open as you can. And I remember being woken up to the pipes and the drums. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And I got a really good picture. Unfortunately, it's too far away because I had one of the old disposable cameras. We didn't have the mod cons we've got now. And literally the Royal Irish were doing a proper parade, marching down our tents in the morning at stupid o'clock. We're like, what the bloody hell is going on here? But it was fabulous. The atmosphere was great. I will never forget that one. That was great. And they had the kilts and everything. And part of you are thinking, how on earth did they bring them out? With everything else we had to bring out. They're bringing their pipes and their drums and stuff. But I thought, oh, fair play. That was really good. I think that really shifted our morale. That was very good.
Well, in that case, it must be essential kit.
Definitely. If it's morale, it's essential. But yeah, that was definitely one I remembered.
So you've alluded to just then about the positive things from your perspective that happened in Iraq. What could you give me? Because you said you could give us a couple of examples.
So yeah, I mean, if I go into the morning of, it was so surreal. It was like if you turned on the television but just turned the volume down. Everyone just quietly got on with what they needed to do. It was like there was no noise. It was really strange. And I think anyone that loaded up on that first convoy with us, I mean, I say the first convoy, it was about 3 kilometers long. But everyone just got on with it. And there was such a sense of anticipation, but camaraderie at the same time, because we were all in it together. I mean, there were a few not very nice moments and you feel completely on your own, but ultimately we were all there for each other. And I mean, there was a funny moment. I had a really heavy Bowser and I was driving with a convoy and we had to pull round off the road because we went the wrong way. I think we found out the Americans spoofed one of the GPS systems that we had, which was really annoying. um, but yeah, I remember being stuck, and I'm one of the really good VMs that can get out of stuff like that. And I thought, typical, the female gets stuck in the mud. And I jumped out of my wagon and I kind of threw a little bit of a hissy fit. The body armor went down, the rifle went down. And I was like, you bunch of idiots, because there was a massive pothole of water. And the commander just took us all through it. But I'm the only one with fuel on board. So, of course, I was heavier and didn't have a clue. I was like, oh, no, please don't put us around here. I'm not going to be able to get out. So, of course, we were a target. But, I mean, we were lucky where we were. I was probably overthinking it. But when you're that stressed and a little bit, agitated, it doesn't take much. But I was really lucky. I think that was the only hissy fit I had where it just kind of wasn't fair. But the guys were really good. Everyone kind of went through their own hissy fit moment, I can say. And I can comfortably say that. Because, you just have to really improvise. There's a lot of stuff that does not go to plan in a war zone, no matter how many preliminaries, how much training. You just can't account for things that go wrong. I think most of us have been parents since. And I think if you can say you can't ever prepare for a baby, it's exactly the same for a war zone. You can be informed, but it doesn't fully prepare you for when it actually happens. So you really got to expect the unexpected.
Okay, so what were the unexpected things that kind of surprised you, I guess, or maybe frightened you? I don't know.
Some I maybe can't say, Steve.
Okay.
I think one annoying factor, and I saw lots of hissy fits on this, was the fact that we're supposed to be doing stuff and have activity around the border before we went over, which is common knowledge now. So I'm not giving away any state secrets there. And it's like, yeah, because why would we be British forces around the border of Iraq anyway? So we're trying to make that normal. It seemed a bit bizarre. And then they made us do shell scrapes and missile pit practice. And we're like, but now we're degrading our old NBC suits. So if they have got nuclear, biological, or chemical warfare, this is going to wind everyone up, because we're all getting fatigued, don't get me wrong, but you're degrading your suits when you might actually need them. Why are we doing that? That was a complete waste of time. And there's other things where we kept getting volunteered for things where it kind of, we have a can-do attitude, don't get me wrong, and we got on with it. But some things were unnecessary for certain hierarchy to look good, and the guys knew it. And unfortunately, you don't know how good or bad your unit is until you actually go to war. So there were certain characters that really surprised me. I mean, there's some people that came back completely different people. But I'm not the only one that knew that, okay, we don't know how we're going to react into a war zone, but there's maybe no need to react like that. There was a lot of speculation. Obviously, we heard of Gulf War syndrome with the first Gulf, was some of the things that we had to take. And there was a little bit of a hoo-ha about that, which don't really want to go into too much detail, but everyone that did Telic would know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And just the fact that, I remember one sortie we did with an aircraft. And of course, you've still got things that go wrong on an aircraft as you would in the UK. And there was a protection team with us out. And we had one 4-tonner, one Land Rover with a signals unit in it, and 2 pilots down with one of our aircraft in the middle of the desert between Iraq and Kuwait.
Right.
We were literally in the middle of nowhere. And the problem was, because it was before the war zone, there was no Card Alpha, there was no prisoners of war, because officially the war hadn't started yet. I mean, we're talking days. And I'll be totally honest, only one guy had about 10 rounds on him. The rest of us had nothing. We weren't issued rounds at that point. Yeah, you're
okay.
Right,
You can see my facial expression. Everybody else can't. So
okay, and there was a sandstorm, and we're literally battened down the 4-tonner, and we're in there. And it got to the point where we had to get the signals truck, which was our only form of communications, to go back to get food and get provisions and give our grid reference. And we're kind of hoping they don't get sidetracked, broken down or anything.
Yeah.
Because we're stuck out there, about 8 of us, 2 pilots and a 4-ton truck and a helicopter in the middle of nowhere. And they've forgotten about us. And we've got no rations. I think the pilot maybe had about 10 rounds in his Browning pistol.
Yeah.
And we've all got weapons. And we're like, what do we do? Pew, pew. And yeah, we had a group of locals come over to our position, and we're thinking, well, okay, just be professional, stand our ground, see what we can do. And thankfully, they wanted to give themselves up to us. So yeah, it was quite funny because we couldn't take them. They wanted to be prisoners of war before the war started. And we were like, really sorry, but you've got to go back to where you've come from because we can't take you yet. And the rest of us were like, thank God for that, because it could have been very different.
Were these locals or were they soldiers, Sarah?
You can't tell.
You can't tell, right? Okay.
You can't tell. So again, we just had to be looking at their body language, looking at what they had, kind of pray and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Steve,
Yeah.
But yeah, we were lucky, very lucky, because as you know, when people then get scarce as the war progressed, you'd have crowds of people wanting food and aid.
Yeah.
And this came back to, I know I did a good job, because a lot of the helicopter stuff that we did once the actual, how do we put it, liberating the country, we weren't allowed to take it over, weren't allowed to fly our flags. But I must admit, my mum did send me out some Union flag pants. So a bit of morale. And we do have a thing in my family called the Davis Moon. And my dad used to embarrass us all the time. So we weren't allowed to fly our Union Jack flags, but that didn't stop me from maybe pulling the odd moonie on occasion, just for morale. And we did actually have a bunch of Americans that wanted to swap 10 MREs for my pants, which was hilarious. And I was like, no.
It's not, Sarah, it's not that kind of podcast. Let's just stay.
No, but it was just for, do you know what? It was just nice that my mum was so prolific. The packages that even complete strangers used to send out to soldiers. And I had a bit of a weird moment. So this is quite a fun thing, because I remember with the first Iraq War, and I was a school child, and we were writing to a soldier. School kids would write out. So can you believe the fact that we're then getting mail sent out? And my mum was great. She'd number them, because we just get a job lot occasionally because we were that far forward of the front line, to a soldier from a school kid. And I was like, whoa, that kind of blew my mind. But also they had packages just for female soldiers, which were fantastic. They'd stick extra sanitary stuff or conditioner, little travel sizes, which, not being funny, were great for us out there. So yeah, if you wanted to do something like that, I definitely recommend it. And I apologize, I couldn't keep a track, obviously, with keeping stuff out there on who sent me what. But I was so grateful. It was one of the biggest morale boosters there ever. And although my mum knew she couldn't send me out chocolate, she used to send out the chocolate tracker bars. So we were still getting a little bit at home. And they were just, the morale that came in through parcels and blueies were just amazing.
That's really interesting, because obviously in this day and age, everything's electronic, it's email, Facebook or whatever. And yet we didn't have that then, of course. No. And, but also the power of it's a very traditional way of doing things, isn't it? Sending a parcel out or a letter, and I think the power of that is quite interesting to hear.
It was so great, I can't tell you. And my mom had a habit of writing letters that just reminded me of being home. So when you had 5 minutes to yourself and you could read that letter, it just teleported you straight home. She'd talk about, she forgot, or she had a go at dad because he didn't bring in the geraniums and there's been the first frost, and having to scrape the cars in the morning and it made her late for work, and you can see your breath in the morning. And of course, when you're dealing with 40-degree heat, you just want to be back there. It just gave you that home from home. And the other second best letters that I had were from my grandfather, my late grandfather, who
Wow.
shared a desert with Monty's 8th Army back in the day. And there's a lovely picture with me and a guy called Stephen Kopaz, and we're both in a truck together. And we were discussing it. His grandfather was also part of Monty's 8th Army. So we thought, how weird is that? Both our grandfathers shared the same desert and we're here serving together.
Mm.
You know, so there's some very strange moments like that. But yeah, the aid drops for the people were absolutely prolific. Every 4 days, we used to do the aid drops and take it in turns when we were close to Al Almara. And we were more afraid of
Sarah, tell us what an aid drop is, please, and just a little bit more about that.
So we obviously used to refuel and rearm attack helicopters, but we did underslung loads. That's part of the Army Air Corps remit. And I do remember that a lot of the I'm jumping here because I remember doing a sortie and we're having to double up on landing points and landing point commanders because we had so many new people that hadn't even done a live turning and burning refuel. So we had to be safe. But I remember this one day and a Chinook was flying over. And oh yeah, that's the Royal Navy or whatever. And suddenly it was coming in and I was like, oh, hang on a minute, and putting my arms up and this guy's landed. And I've gone over, obviously they've opened the door, we go in. And I'm like, hello, sir, how can I help you? He's like, we need some fuel, please. And he's fluttering his eyelids at me. And I said, sir, this is an army sortie. We've only got 4.5 grand's worth of AFTA on board each. And I know I'm doing the mental maths. There's 2 double fuel tanks. You know, it's suppers dry in one fell swoop, depending how much fuel they need. And he says, no, you don't get it. He said, if we don't get fuel, we're not going to get these Marines back on ship. So I'm like, okay, dynamic risk assessment. I have to give you fuel. I can't. You're more of a target to us and everyone else the longer you're on the ground. So, and I believe straight from then we became JHF because we suddenly realized we're the only mad unit that far forward with fuel and ammunition and AFTA, which is one of the most flammable liquids known to man. And it does make you feel a bit tapped when you've got shells flying past your wing mirror, crack bang, and you're thinking, thank God they bloody missed. I probably wouldn't realize it. And you get told they're self-sealing if you do get hit. But to me, that's a bit like Dumbo with the magic feather. You don't want to take that risk. You don't want to actually find out. So yeah, it was just crazy the amount of stuff we did out there, and it was also great. We refueled airframes that we'd never touched before. You know, you literally look, is it high pressure hose or low pressure hose? Low pressure hose being like the ones you stick in your car. Mm-hmm. High pressure hoses being like the Formula One that you push in and lock in. So yeah, the live turning and burning refuels were my favorites anyway, because it was a bit like Formula One pit stop, in and out quick. And we did Kazivacs, we did, prisoner transfers. And I managed to get a picture actually of a friend of mine, medic, going in one of the Pumas. And you can see the end of my boot where I'm taking a picture over my shoulder because we'd have to batten down the tow missiles with shade in case they went off in the heat. But of course, if a helicopter comes and lands, it can throw it up as FOD and it can obviously cause damage. So we literally dive bomb where we've got shade on the tow missiles as they're landing. And doing a turning, burning, drop off or pick up. But we used to call it the Four Walls, just outside of Basra. We had a sort of a landing point for a while before the Marines took over. And it's funny, actually, I don't know if anyone would know this. There was this lovely fluffy dog that we adopted called Jenny. And I did hear of a nasty rumour that it might have been killed, but it was kind of our camp dog. And it was chasing away all the other rabid dogs, because that was another enemy that we had to deal with. We had groups of rabid dogs on the prairie. And the other sort of fun fact, if you remember it, they set fire to the GOSPs, the oil pipelines.
Yep.
So, and at night, I used to call them candles, because there would constantly be a flame. And obviously, if you're in a desert because of the moon, if it's out, great, you can see for miles. But if there's no moon, you can't see your hand in front of your face.
Wow.
And these GOSPs would be like pipeline, massive candles you could see for miles. And then, of course, during the daylight, I mean, their whole ethos on that was they were trying to create smoke so that we couldn't see what was going on the ground, which didn't really work because they just set on fire. But the gosps that were on fire, the smoke that went into the atmosphere, literally got into the cloud base. So when it would rain, we would get oil all over our uniform, literally drops of oil.
Wow.
And again, you had to have been there to experience that, because not a lot of people realised we were dealing with that. And again, you were quite happy you were in an aviation unit with drip trays, because you could set Avta on fire to get rid of the mosquitoes, and you'd have to watch out for camel spiders and scorpions. And when there was an electrical storm, it would literally go up to the axles. So yeah, I've got the first stages of hypothermia one night because I think one of the infantry units had nicked my fly forward Bergen, because we shared an ISO container with them. And I had more minimal kit than I had. I mean, I coped. You know, I was an infantry army cadet. I managed to get rid of my saturation foot, which is the first stages of trench foot. I managed to get rid of that within 3 days. But there are other things like, I mean, the pilots tried to take us stuff from camps if they were ever going back that way as well. They were quite cool. But some of them were trying to take yogurts out and then wondering why D&V was around.
So this is a pretty challenging, I mean, aside from the fact you're actually at war, I mean, the environment, the circumstances of that conflict are challenging at best, aren't they?
They are. And I look back now, and I'm saying it very sort of matter of fact, but it's like, even since then, it's like I've worn my medal. And people are looking at it and I go, well, what one's that one? I'm not that old, mate. I'm 43. But, you know, it's the one I earned. I mean, due to kids and family and stuff, there was little breaks in between, and I've been an army reservist. And I've missed out on Jubilee medals by weeks or what have you. You know, which is a shame, because obviously we're in the Elizabethan age, but they're attendance medals at the end of the day. This one I know I've earned. But I still have people saying, well, Sarah, you've done this, and this. Why haven't you got? And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. You know, it's the fact that I've served with other people. I've shared the same desert with them. They get it. And I've had so many circumstances where I just think I'm so lucky. I've either blocked it out or I've taken it for what it is. And I haven't suffered as badly as some of them. And arguably, I only did one tour. But sometimes that's enough for people. And I know people that have been massively damaged. You know, and I just think it's not a bad thing to admit when you're struggling or something triggers you.
Yeah.
I haven't been diagnosed, but I've helped those that have. You know, I was so lucky. I got involved with the Soldiers Arts Academy a couple of years ago. And we did a whole run in the West End about PTSD and how it affected people. You know, you've got Cassidy Little, he lost a leg. You've got certain people that have been medically discharged. These things are out there for you. You don't need to join the Invictus Games. You know, you've got therapy for arts for veterans. You don't have to be damaged to do that. You've got Military Wives Choir, if you're that way inclined. You've got, I mean, homes for veterans, the amount of charities I'm in, and obviously, you know, we're alluding on to that as after Iraq. But they do say it is around about maybe 10, 15, even 20 years down the road, you can start to have that pain in your chest, which I didn't know what it was. You know, it's the anxiety, and things will start playing on your mind, or suddenly you're irritable and you don't know why, or it's extra pressure afterwards, and it compacts on what you've already had. It makes you feel a certain way. And all I'll say is it's not big and it's not clever to keep silent on that. And another thing is, since 2018, the NHS on their website have had this term, veteran friendly, with every doctor's surgery in the country. And I got an apology only last year, because my own doctor's surgery in the Royal Borough of Windsor with 2 garrisons didn't quite know what veteran friendly was. But they did retrain, and I'm hoping that's helping more than just me in this area. Because we're not age concerned. You know, we're only in our 40s, those of us that have we're in our 20s doing Iraq, for example. There's the veteran community is only getting bigger.
Do you know, I think this is a really good point, because I think, as you know, we work with ex-service people. We do lots of creative activities. So we're kind of, obviously very interested in what you've got to say about that. And I do agree with you. The power of doing stuff that's creative, from acting to photography, whatever it may be, is not to be underestimated. But I do think there's quite an assumption that, what is a veteran in the sort of more public consciousness, that it's always, let's be honest, often seen as like the Chelsea pensioners, which are obviously veterans, and that's true, but there are other cohorts of veterans, aren't there? I mean, as you said, you're only 42, I think you've said, which is probably a lot younger than most people would assume to be a veteran in many ways.
Yeah, and it's strange because the term veteran initially, it was like, well, I'm not old. And I remember I've been with my doctor's surgery, about 8-9 years now, since I moved closer to home. And I remember there was a checkbox, and we've all seen them, those of us that are in Civvy Street now, about previous military service. And I remember being offered a flu jab. And this was about 4 or 5 years ago. So I was in my 30s. And I'm like, why am I being offered a flu jab? I'm a veteran. I'm not a pensioner, with all due respect.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that's going to be wasted on me. And the other thing is, it's not that we want preferential treatment. It's just we've probably given our bodies so much more, I don't know, wear and tear, that the doctors can then prioritize you in a different way or use a different budget to help you. So it's not about creating a fuss. I mean, I was lucky my mum was part of the medical profession. And she'd say, and this is great advice for everyone, by the way, if you have an issue with your doctor's surgery, ask to speak and complain to the practice manager. Doctors are going to hate me for doing this. But every surgery runs like a business, and they're the ones that are held accountable. And everyone has a right, if they're not happy, to complain to the practice manager. Don't just take it on the say-so of the receptionists, but do say, look, I'm sorry to ask, but are you veteran friendly? And if they don't know what that is, say, well, I need to be put through to the practice manager to discuss this, please, because it's been on the NHS website since 2018. And it's not that you want preferential treatment. It's because they have a different budget and a different way of being able to get you guys help. So I've also dealt with the Rothy charity. Fantastic. Because we worked out with the go-between, we've still got links with the army, and we're a bit careful. It's not the army's fault, but it's looking at the gap between leaving the army and getting help in Civvy Street, especially if you've had something like a medical discharge.
Yeah.
Because the mental health arena will get worse and worse and worse, because half of that is, well, I'm losing the job that I love and I'm losing my stability with my work. So what do I do now? And this is where veterans get homeless, because we get taught to be in the army. Resettlement does not give you that reverse basic training that you need to settle into Civvy Street.
Yeah.
What happens, you get taught really well and you get put on courses and it's fantastic. But as well for women, it's like, I'm sorry, I left to have a family. I was told that if I got deployed, my children could be in foster care. And I didn't want that. And that was one of the main reasons why I said I'm not putting my mum through that, because obviously if I have a family, I can't put them through that. That's my own personal choice. And I don't have any judgment on anyone that did anything differently. That was just the role I did. And ultimately, I missed the army. And I didn't realise till I'd become a mum, after being a Lance Corporal, recommended for promotion, recommended for commission, and I'd reached burnout, that actually just becoming a mum, which there's nothing wrong in, I got treated like I couldn't believe. I got treated really badly. A pregnant mother going through the doctors and the NHS and blah, blah, blah. You kind of get treated like a bit of a leper, I have to say. It was appalling. And then, of course, I had the whole, and everyone can get baby blues. I had a healthcare visitor that had come along and she's asking me how I'm doing. And I had a bit of a traumatic birth process, which I won't completely go into. But she said, oh, you're a veteran, or you're an ex-military person. Oh, yes, I had to take off some lady's baby because she was mentally struggling. And then asking me in the same conversation if I'm okay. And I'm like, yep, I'm fine.
Wow.
You've just told me you've taken away someone's baby because they're mentally struggling postpartum. So yeah, I'm fine. I don't want to talk to you.
No.
Sort of mind blowing, really.
Do you know, one of the questions I was going to ask you is how is it different as a woman? And I think you probably answered that question without me having to ask you. What are you involved in now post-service? Because I think you've left the reserves, I think, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the process of it, because I'm kind of, I've got to the point where I love giving my time, and there's the old, the dits, the stories, you're teaching the recruits, there's the old camaraderie. But honestly, it's not really doing what I want it to. And obviously, like you say, with resettlement and things, you've got 10 years as a woman to be able to claim, but you don't know what you want to do when you've got children. So then you miss out. And I've missed out. Tried to get some of that back with the reserves. And it has been useful. It has been. And it gives you a bit of something back. But it's definitely not the same. It's not the same that I joined. And ultimately, I want to do more. There's the help for homeless veterans, the Soldiers Arts Academy, which I'm loving. Like I said, I got into theatre. I think with anyone that's struggling, I would advise, get to your local old regimental association.
Yeah.
There is very much this stigma of, oh, you're not part of us anymore. And actually, that's still your family. You feel like that when you leave, because you're like, oh, you're a turncoat, you're leaving. But actually, it's the biggest set of brothers and sisters you're going to have now. Like I said, the veteran community is only growing bigger and bigger. I've got 2 presenting roles coming up, one for dealing with homeless veterans and celebrities doing a sleep out, which we're hoping to get the funding for pretty much soon, and another one for untold stories, dealing with all sorts of people that we want to recognise throughout the ages, throughout time, and through the help of Mark Busby, really hitting home on the fact that every veteran's got a story that's worth telling.
Yeah.
And just celebrating that, because we don't want to leave anyone behind, which is one of the charities, the Royalty Charity, because they get money. You're on the NHS waiting list for 3 to 5 years as a medical discharge, which, as we know, can be too late for some. So there are these charities out there that can get funding to get you diagnosed so that you can get the help you need straight away. So yeah, don't suffer in silence. There's more of us out there. And I'm just really grateful to be a part of a movement now where we're just sticking together and we're putting the word out there. And like I said, the veteran community is only going to get bigger.
So would you recommend getting involved in acting or the media? Because it's not it's not an obvious path, is it? That I've genuinely been surprised about, and as you know, we've met through Tip, a mutual friend, is that generally surprised about the amount of people who've served who are involved in the creative industries. And I say that in a really broadest sense of the words.
Do you know what it is? Do you know what it is, Steve? It's really interesting. When I've done role play for things like security and job roles, it comes naturally. Because the army are prolific. We have to stand up. We're taught this leadership thing very early on of speaking in front of your peers, putting your head above the parapet. Hurry up, wait. Because I'm not being funny. You have to wait a lot on a film set.
Yeah.
Or as an extra. And all this military experience nonsense. You can't beat proper military people. We get it. You turn up, you're on time. You have this working ethos. It's perfect. But obviously it's not consistent money. So, do bear that in mind. But the Soldiers Arts Academy, they've got workshops. So go onto their website, follow them on social media. There's all these sorts of different workshops now where there's singing, there's arts and crafts, there's puppeteering, there's acting, script writing, all sorts. In fact, BFPS Radio is another one.
Yep.
They've got production manager courses that are being funded for veterans.
Yeah.
There's all sorts, and we are natural project managers, and we can deal with all sorts of people, because let's face it, we're all thrown in together. One of my ex-bosses turned around and said, Sarah, you'd be great at acting. You've had to get on with people that you've hated, that have been horrible to you for years. And it's tongue in cheek, but it's true. We are people. We say we hate people, but that's just because we think that civilians don't get us. But we get each other.
I'm trying. I'm trying, Sarah.
Steve, you're a diamond, but it's having that acceptance.
Yeah.
Because whatever organisation or work I've done, we always sniff each other out as vets, no matter what age range you are. And it is quite interesting because you're a part of a bigger club now. You're out of the military. You've just got to open your eyes and widen your branches if you're feeling on your own. Because even just talking and having a rant, you can't really do it with a civilian. You can do it with an army person and it won't go any further. And I've learned that the hard way. So sometimes it takes one to know one, and you've just got to dip in there. LinkedIn, again, is very, very good. You've got a whole veterans network on LinkedIn. It's fantastic. And we all try and help each other out. Ex-mil recruitment, because they can transpire your CV into civvy speak and look at it, because we'll look at it as a transferable skill. And the army have got a lot better at that now. But back in the day, we didn't have that. So there's so much more out there. You've just got to ask. You've just got to put your head above the parapet and just ask. So ask your old regimental association, ask your old colleagues, just do it.
I couldn't agree more with all of this. And I think also, depending on when people left, depending on how long ago it was, a lot of these things just didn't exist, did they? The landscape of support, whilst not perfect, has changed enormously in the last 5-10 years.
And this was one of the other reasons why I really wanted to do this podcast. I might not be, the SAS Are You Tough Enough spokesperson that has done tour after tour after tour after tour. But because I came out early to have a family, I've kind of dealt with a lot of these issues. A lot of my cohorts now leaving are facing, and I just feel I'm better able to help. And again, if you don't know about it, you're not going to get the help. I mean, even in terms of certain benefits, I didn't know what I was entitled to.
Yeah.
No one tells you what to do when things go wrong. So I think it's really important to put the word out, to know that there is so much help out there. You've just got to find it and not look at the first hurdle as being that people don't care, because it is such the opposite. And we've all known people. I think if you're in any veteran community, we know people, unfortunately, that have taken their lives. And it can be any age range now. It's scary. And all it takes is just get it off your chest and speak to someone, whether it's an old friend, an old colleague, an old boss that you used to know in the army, or just speak to someone that doesn't know you, that deals with one of these veteran charities, because we're out there now. We've had to.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, we don't want to leave anyone behind anymore. And that's why we're really, really getting behind each other.
Yeah, we don't want to leave anyone behind, and we don't want anybody committing suicide, basically. We don't want that to happen at all. And there is support out there. And I think, often people isolate themselves or aren't aware of what's out there, and there is support. We can put some contact details to get in touch with us. And if there's anything you want me to share, Sarah, we can put that in the description in the podcast as well. I think we could spend another couple of hours talking about this. This has been absolutely fascinating. And I'm really looking forward to seeing some of these productions. So fingers crossed it all comes to fruition.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's helped me no end. I've got a show reel. I've got an agent now. So who knows? There's life in the old bird yet, Steve.
Well, you said you're only 42, so there's plenty of time left. Make the most of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. No, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. God bless.
Now, before Steve and Tip chat about what we've just heard, you may be interested to know that here at Company of Makers, we've got loads of online activities for veterans to get involved in. As well as this podcast, we've got online talks with inspiring guests. And we've got workshops where you can have a go at things like drawing, writing and photography. To register your interest, just head over to companyofmakers.com/workshops. Now, back to Steve and Tip.
So another fascinating chat tip. What did you make of that?
No, it's great. I mean, in a way, from working with Sarah and different things, I know her story, but that really got into her life and her journey, and it was really important, and I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed listening to her, and she tells a good story as well.
She does indeed. So just for the ignorant like me, what is the role of the Army Air Corps? Because I think most people don't realise that the Army have helicopters.
Well, they own our attack helicopters, our Apaches now, as well as like the support elements. And they're probably a big portion of their work is with the 16 Air Assault Brigade, as it was the old parachute 5 Armor Brigade. So they've got aviation assets and soldiers that are able to deploy and they carry out both, G4 tasks, or should we say logistic tasks, but also strike and transporting troops forward into battle. And with that, they've got fires. So the support you get from Apache attack helicopters is incredible. It's I'm the difference from maybe 30 years ago when we didn't have them to what we have now is an incredible enhancement of fighting capability. If you look at it, can we say on that front, on the kinetic front, it's very surgical and it can be, very effective.
So Sarah's story starts with the cadets.
Yeah, I did. That was the highlight. One of my notes was just, when she joined up, that joining the cadets, and it's I'd say that. I mean, for our people, so many of our people in the armed forces have come through the cadet route, and even when you listen to Sarah's, her appetite for adventure was fed by the cadets, which is brilliant. And they brought her forward, and they sort of I think the stimulus for her to want to become a soldier and to join the army. And I think at that point in time, the way things have that transcendence in gender equality in the armed forces, that possibly was the start of it for everyone, not only for Sarah as she was going through the process. So she joined the cadets, had all the positives there, and she said it was quite bizarre. One of the things she did say was, and I got to my teenage years and was deciding what I was going to do. And then she went back and said, and my teenage daughter is completely different. That sort of, the thought, that inside her head. Because I think all of us, we always feel in some way we're still that 14-year-old. But for her, it's sort of like you don't. When you're sort of there and you're a parent or a mum and you look at your 14-year-old daughter, you're going, wow, well, why do they think that way? But we all were like that at some stage. So it was good. Just that little part of her journey was good. But I can see why then the sort of seeds were planted for her career in the army, or her choices to join the army. And I think, I know it's later down the line, but when we were that parental link, I mean, it happened, I think, for me or anybody in the armed forces, when you're focused and you want to become part of the armed forces, it's for you. You're doing it for you. You think, subconsciously in a way, you're doing it, as with the direct support of your family. But I think, and Sarah backs up when she says it, as a parent now, it's so different. And when you go back and you speak to your parents, especially when it comes to times when you're deployed in operations and you do phone back, they are struggling with what's happening. They're struggling with you being obviously disconnected from the family, especially in your sort of like, your teen to 20s. You still got a massive pathway of your life to happen. But your family are there, you're still their child, and you're in harm's way. And for me, I didn't truly realize my family were going through those sort of things until I became a parent myself, and my son deployed in operations. And that to me was, after everything that I went through, was the most traumatic thing. And Sarah actually mentions that, and she says about the family and how distressed they were when she called back from Iraq. So that link with family is that understanding, I think, and people should know that as parents, you're always going to be those parents. So your offspring are always going to be those wee childs or those wee children that were kicking around in the yard, in the back garden, that were always there. They never grow old to you, even when they become parents themselves. But it's just, I can see. I guess for me, it was a bit of a understanding, like Sarah going, oh, they're finding it really hard doing this. And again, her love for her family made her change her viewpoint and what her career path would be.
It's important to recognise, isn't it, that the family joins up as well to a degree, don't they?
They do. I mean, for my family back in Ireland, it was a hard call for them to let me do, but they did. And I have to completely salute them. And I love them for letting me follow my adventure. And I think all of us in the armed forces, I think Sarah highlights it as well, that they do have the support in that, but they will never miss the fact that they love you to pieces, and you're going to put yourself in harm's way, no matter who you are, your background, or where you're from. There's respect, but there will always be that love.
The commitment and potential sacrifices, isn't there? Just in terms of, I'm not talking about the ultimate sacrifice, but sacrifices in time, contact with your family. You're making a commitment there, aren't you?
It is, but I think reality could be that if you lose your child before you die, and I think for any person, no matter if you've been in the armed forces, that's a very, very hard thing to take on board. Your life has changed at that point for the rest of your time. And it has happened for to so many of the families of our people that have died in operations.
She also talks about, doesn't she, the role of women in the armed forces, and I guess that must have changed a lot in the last 20 years.
Indeed, and I think her adventure from the cadets right through to when she finished the army, even to this point now, where she's still a massive supporter of veterans and what we do, is she's part of that transcendence. She's the one that's been, there. She tried to want to be in the engineers that couldn't at the time. All those have changed, and she's been there at the forefront, I think, of that, that equality in the armed forces. And we're still not there, by no means, but we're moving there and we're getting that equality. But the equality is measured by professionalism and our output. So I, as a personal feeling, feel that we have to maintain those standards on different elements of the arms, but accessibility comes to everybody. So you have, by virtue of being a human being, supporting our armed forces. So it doesn't matter about gender, sexuality, color of skin or anything, faiths. It's completely is just, it's there. You're there to support and fight for the freedoms that our culture, which is a massively free culture, supports. So really, accessibility is there. Standards within our military infrastructure must be maintained at whatever level, whether it be, tech level, G4 level, fighting level, all those things have got to be done, but it's open to everybody. And that's the equality. And again, support to make those different people from different backgrounds to overcome any challenges, to make sure that they've got the best opportunity to pass it. And I think if we do that as a culture, as a country, I think we will get the best people in those roles, and again, it optimizes our whole armed forces.
She's also talking about obviously helicopter operations and the importance of helicopter operations, and I know many of our other guests have discussed that. I think it's an important facet of the armed forces that I don't know, all the glamour goes to the fast jets or what have you, but helicopter operations are really important, aren't they?
In today's modern battlefield, I think your aviation assets are your workhorses. You still need to have sort of a heavy lift, like wheel-based assets, and you obviously got your shipping to get all your logistics to the shore, and the craft to transfer it, and there's all different stages. But when it comes to the land aspect, aviation is fundamental now to winning. Not even that, it's not just necessarily war, but in an operational environment, whether it be humanitarian aid or anything, they are just invaluable. They sort of the evolution of warfare and support to disaster zones. Aviation assets are just fundamental. They're a need to have. That, whether it be completely for life-saving sort of support or even life-changing support using fires.
And also this idea that she was responsible for it's basically a gas station or a petrol station for helicopters.
Yeah,
I don't know why I didn't really anticipate that.
No, but with it, and I've come across it. We work quite a bit in Afghanistan and Iraq, working with FOBs forward our refueling points and different things. And you can make as an actor now and as a theatre goer, you can make a whole subject on that combat fuel station. I mean, you one of the characters, but also the threat, the volatility, especially with Avatar. You look at the fuel they've got, and they're normally working out of big bladders or, like, say, oil tankers. You think if they get struck by any piece of ordnance or munition, that is some serious damage that can be done, both to those people securing it and also denying what supports your workhorse, your aviation assets. So the value, and this goes from, like, say, it's the armed forces, from the teeth element that's scrapping at the front with the enemy, all the way back to everything, back to people that are like I'd say even doing like sending out the boxes. She did mention the boxes. The support, sending like kids sending boxes out. They're the important step of the whole of not the campaign, but of the whole of support to what we're achieving. But I think at the crux of it, you think about the support that a FOB, a refueling of any sort of, whether it be for armor or for aviation or fast jets, even, like, because that could be done like forward as well. They are pivotal, and it's a classic. It could be looked upon as a G4 asset, but it's definitely, with technology nowadays, it's right in the battle zone and is a vulnerability as much as a teeth soldier as well.
So coming back to, I imagine it must have been quite a challenging environment to be a woman in the armed forces back then, because there weren't that many, were there, really, especially on operations?
But I think actually you are right to a certain extent. By today's sort of like, battlefield scenario, the amount of, female soldiers on the ground. But even at the time, you'd be surprised how many there actually were deployed on the ground, including Sarah. And like I say, she's a front one runner, by all accounts, in this movement towards equality in the armed forces and in the front line and in teeth arms. But you think about when we deployed during this time on Telic 1, we'd already been in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, we had female Chinook pilots that were right on the front line who were delivering and dropping people off on knife edge ridges in Afghanistan and the Pakistani border under continual threat from attack from small arms, RPGs, and everything else. And they're operating. That is right on the pivotal. They're flying the bullet magnet. So it has been happening, and it's just progressively more, and it's now filtering in, and that equality or opportunity. If opportunity is quite a weird one to say, because obviously they're putting themselves into the firing line, but those opportunities are now open to, like you say, everyone. No matter what skin color, gender, sexuality, anything. It's opportunity there for all. And it's if they hit the marks at the whatever that service level requirement is, then they'll be it. The best people will be there delivering and supporting our freedoms and what we protect.
I guess ultimately the armed forces is a reflection of the population from which it's drawn. So, times have changed, haven't they? They
have, but also in the reverse of that also means that reflection means that we are, as the armed forces, are still part of that community.
Yeah.
We've obviously a subsecond community, possibly because of our experiences, but we are fully embedded and we are part of our society. And that's the society and the culture that we fight to protect. So it's really, things are moving around, but it's a full circle thing that we've got to realize as veterans that we do have to, as we see it, fuse back into a society, which we're already part of. But that's the challenges that a lot of veterans have. And it's good because in this, Sarah does say the challenge that she had when she left service and was ongoing through her, when she became a mother, and the support she was getting after being a veteran or being in service, where you had your own GP, you had your doctor, you had your own dentist. Just those simple challenges when you leave service, getting your GP and getting a dentist, which again is not only for service people, but across the board. To get an NHS dentist nowadays is, it's pretty, can we say rocking horse poo? Or is that there? It's,
you can say that. Yeah,
it's about as rare as that, but it's still a challenge. And I think because you've come from an environment where that's provided, I'm not, there are ways, it's means, but rather than going back into joining a queue, I think should be a better process for fusing those veterans back into that expected place. They should already have a GP, so possibly is there a point for discussion about maybe them jumping the queue and getting themselves there because they've come, they would have been in the queue a lot longer before if they weren't in service. That's something that people, should discuss really, I think. But just the other challenges throughout, the social support that we get, I think it's that fusion rather than have the full steady bastion that you have within the armed forces. When you get out, you have to fuse into what is provided for society. And that does maybe provides challenges for people.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think also health conditions they present later after you've left the service and you may not have registered for a doctor, and that just adds more and more complexity, doesn't it? And we're not here to discuss the state of the NHS, but it's not easy at the best of times, is it?
No, like I say, and that's not, I don't think I'm even sort of like, in a position where I can, judge anything in that respect, but it's still, it's challenges. These are human challenges that people have to face. So we have to accept them. But what Sarah continually demonstrated, and I think even after the challenges she's faced, is just the way she's built up her resilience, and she comes across as a survivor.
Yeah. And
she's got that, and again, a bit like, when we're speaking to other people or other guests, that glass half full, you know what I mean? She has had challenges. She is an overcomer. She's overcome this and she's moving forward with her life and her family and doing things. And that resilience is always admirable to see. But it's good for people to go, no, people have been in the same sort of scenarios that Sarah's been in, but her, in some way, she's slightly iconic to go, well, this is it. Have that resilience. Look at our Sarah. Look what she's doing.
Yeah, and she's very passionate about all of that as well. One of the other things she talked about when she's talking about El Alamein and was it her grandfather that served there as well?
Yeah, I straight away linked into that one as just that generational link in the armed forces. Because she's speaking about, obviously, and she's talking like, in an endearing way about, her grandfather, who she loved dearly, and how, he in a way could, share that common ground with her, being in the Battle of El Alamein with her operational experience. But then she spoke about her mate, who's in the same sort of detachment, doing the bits and pieces, and his grandparent was, on the same piece of sand or turf that the two grandparents were on. So they're both at El Alamein. And that to me it's so common throughout the armed forces that generationally they go into the armed forces. And in my respect, exactly the same. My great grandfather, Thomas Cullen, was killed in the Battle of the Somme. Skip a couple of generations, I'll admit. But then I was in the armed forces, and my sons are in the armed forces. So I can see it. Is it? And this is very hard as well. Remember that parental thing, that hardship as a parent, when your son or daughter join the armed forces and put themselves in harm's way, it's extremely difficult. And one of the feelings you have is blame. Is it your fault? Are they there because they've listened to your sad old stories or whatever else that you feel that you've given them, or they've listened to that? They see it as the adventure that they want to be and be part of. But again, and in my case, it is a hard one to sort of face up to, especially when it's that pivotal point, a bit like the L4 was for me, where they're going to put themselves in harm's way. And what if? I mean, I know, did I join up because my great grandfather was at the Battle of Somme? No, I didn't. I did it for my own reasons. But when you have responsibility as a parent, and your offspring decide that they want to do that, that's another layer of challenge as a parent, and emotional trauma in some way, because but you have to face it. It's their choice, it's their life, it's what they want to do. And again, it's either their adventure or it's their career. It's what they want to do, and it is a career, and it's really well structured, and it's a good career. But at least and you can empathize continually with what they're having to go through as a service person, which is important. I think, well, we know there's a benefit to them as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that must be really useful as an asset, so to speak, and support them through that. She's also done some acting as well. I don't know how come everybody you know is an actor as well as served, but there's
it's what we do now, lovey. We are as we are, and yeah, I first met Sarah at the Soldiers Arts Academy, as we said at the intro, and yeah, she's incredible. She's moving forward. She's picking. She does it. She's a very strong, beautiful young lady, and she's moving forward and doing it. But she's also got fingers in pies, doing different things. Like she's done security work, she's worked different things. She is a very valued asset because, in a lot of respects, because she's female and because of her life experience and background, both as a performer but also as an operator in a security environment. She is a valued asset, and because of her strength and her resilience, she's a good person to have on board as in a team. And I've performed with her both on stage in theatre. We've done some dancing as well, and we've also done. We did a short film, which sort of links into one of the things she did come across, and she was saying about that. The exposure with veterans was the homelessness, the veterans that struggle with that fusion back into society and becoming homeless. And myself and Sarah, we done a short film, which again, hopefully you'll come into the launch as well, 24th of May, of SNLR, which is a story about, it's a short film about a homeless veteran and his daily trials and tribulations, but also the words from it are adapted from a play which is based in Victorian times at a train station in Brussels, post or after the Battle of Waterloo. But you can see that all the issues in this play, even though, in some words, it's very classical language, but all the issues are very much prevalent today. Those troubles of a veteran who's injured, who's suffering from PTSD or mental trauma from what they've experienced. They're struggling with fusion into society, and they end up homeless. And that's why, just doing as a performer, being able to create something and be part of something that harnesses this sort of like, the challenges for veterans today, I think is really important. And it's brilliant to have Sarah on board to be, part of that.
And I've seen the show reel for this, haven't I, or a preliminary recording, and I think this is going to be this is a powerful story that you're telling here, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and we're using it. One is to highlight the issues, but also to promote the terminus. So we're going to take that forward next year with an aspirational 40 to 60%, both front of house and back of house, veteran employed, professionally trained veterans. And we're going to take it to festivals next year. And our sort of like end point is performing at Edinburgh in 2024. So it's called the Terminus. So keep an eye out for it. And let's just see how this journey takes us. Obviously, we'll need financial support for that as well.
So any multimillionaires out there, please get in touch.
Yeah, few slack, a couple of grand each and other. Hey, it's what we need.
Well, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Exactly.
So I think that's a really, really important piece of work. And obviously keep an eye on your social media for more about that. But back to Sarah.
Yeah.
So she is obviously really passionate about supporting the armed forces and raising awareness of what's available out there. She's also working on a TV program, which we don't know too much about, do we?
No, it's great to hear, and I have a little smile on my face when I think about it. So it's it's the old can't say anything yet type thing with Sarah, but if it comes to fruition, it's brilliant, and she will be, because of who she is, she'll be an incredible asset to that TV series if and when it comes out. But again, it's another one we can watch this space. So as Sarah moves on in her adventure, I'm sure we'll highlight it and support her career.
I do think this is quite remarkable. This is a very, very familiar refrain with all these stories, Tip, is what people go on to do after service. It's remarkable, isn't it? It's not all end up just doing, security jobs or contracting. It's so diverse.
But I think it's mapping across all those skills and life experiences you pick up in the military. If you stand back and look at it, there's so much in life and civilian life and civilian employment that doors will be open for you if you're able to sort of like accept that and map those skills and bring them across and fuse in and open the door then to your creativity, but also your professional ability, your discipline that you take in the armed forces, bring that across into your new career, with an open mind and with a kind heart. And really you will be successful. But you have to hold that resilience you've had in the armed forces and always fight through and take the position, which is what you would say in the military.
Well, I think those are wise words indeed.
Yeah, it's not my wisdom. It's just it's a matter of fact.
It's unavoidable fact.
The final thing I've got for Sarah is it's a wonderful story, and one, she's a good mate, but it's the first time I've heard a story, and it's incredible. And what I've just got is her positivity, her resilience. She's overcome all the challenges through her service, on operations, and back in Civvy Street. And she's still got those challenges, but she's taken them. She's making choices. She's moving forward. And I think as an icon for all of us, she's a shining example.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you very much, Tip.
Cheers. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Before you go, if you're a member of the Armed Forces community and need support with your mental health, Op Courage can help. Use the link in this podcast description for details. Or you can phone the Combat Stress Helpline on 0800 138 1619. If you'd like to contact us, email studio@companyofmakers.com.
Finally, we're giving a really big shout out to our funders, the Royal Navy and Royal Marines Charity, and the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust. Thank you.
This podcast was produced by Rachel Owen, hosted by Tip Cullen and me, recorded and edited by yours truly.
Company of Makers. Podcast Talks Workshops.